The hospital was a world of its own, especially at night. It hummed with a quiet, desperate energy, a place of bright lights and soft-soled shoes, where worry hung in the air like a faint smell of antiseptic. In one of the busy hallways of the emergency room, a man named Jong-soo was the center of a dangerous storm. He wasn't a tall man, but he stood with a stillness that made him seem to take up all the space around him. His dark eyes were hard, and his jaw was clenched so tight it looked like stone. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, and the men surrounding him, 4 of them, all dressed similarly, were visibly trembling under his quiet, seething anger. One of his youngest men, a boy barely out of his teens, had been foolish. He had gotten into a fight in a territory that wasn't theirs, and had ended up with a broken arm and a nasty cut over his eye. He was being stitched up in a room nearby, and Jong-soo was not angry about the fight, but about the stupidity, the lack of discipline. His voice, when he finally spoke to his other men, was low and cold, like ice cracking on a frozen river. "How could you let this happen?" he asked, and the question was more frightening than any shout. The men bowed their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Just a few doors down, in a small, curtained-off area, a young woman named Adira was trying her best to be brave. She had long, dark hair that was currently a little messy from her fall, and kind brown eyes that were now shiny with unshed tears. She was an artist, and her hands, usually covered in smudges of paint or charcoal, were now scraped and raw. She had been riding her bicycle home from her studio when a car swerved too close, startling her and causing her to tumble onto the hard pavement. Her left arm, her painting arm, had taken the worst of it, and a deep, throbbing cut ran from her elbow to her wrist. The nurse was carefully cleaning it, and the sting made Adira flinch. A dark, purplish bruise was already blooming on her cheekbone, a stark contrast against her smooth, dark skin. She bit her lip, trying not to cry out. She focused on a small crack in the ceiling tile, imagining she was painting a tiny, intricate vine to cover it, a trick she used to distract herself from pain. When the nurse apologized for the sting of the antiseptic, Adira managed a wobbly but genuine smile. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "You're helping me. Thank you." It was this simple act of gratitude, this small light of kindness in the middle of her own pain, that changed the course of the entire night. At that exact moment, Jong-soo, frustrated with his men, turned sharply and began to march down the hallway, his dress shoes making a sharp, angry sound on the linoleum floor. He was a force of pure fury, and nurses and patients alike quickly looked away, sensing the danger that radiated from him. As he passed the slightly open curtain to Adira's room, his eyes, trained to notice every small detail, caught the movement inside. He saw the young woman on the bed. He saw the nurse working on her arm. And he saw the large, ugly bruise coloring her beautiful face. He stopped dead. His entire body went still. The anger that had been boiling inside him suddenly vanished, replaced by a strange, sharp feeling he couldn't name. It was her smile that did it, the way she thanked the nurse while tears were still in her eyes. He saw the pain she was in, but he also saw a strength, a gentleness that was completely foreign to his world of threats and violence. He found he couldn't look away. His men, confused by his sudden halt, nearly bumped into each other trying to stop behind him. Jong-soo stared for a long moment, his hard heart doing something it hadn't done in years. It ached. The sight of that bruise on her cheek filled him with a protective rage, but it was different from the anger he felt toward his men. This was purer. He didn't see a problem to be managed. He saw a person who needed to be shielded. Without turning his head, he spoke to his most trusted friend, a man named Min-ho who stood closest to him. "Bring her to me," Jong-soo ordered. His voice was low, but it held a new, unfamiliar tone. It wasn't a command born of power, but of a desperate, sudden need. He needed to know she was okay. He needed to hear her voice for himself. Min-ho was startled. He had known Jong-soo for 15 years and had never heard him sound like that. He nodded quickly and slipped into Adira's room. A few moments later, Adira was being gently, but firmly, guided out of the room by Minho. She was confused, and more than a little scared. Her heart was beating very fast. Why did this scary man in a suit want to see her? What had she done? She clutched the temporary bandage on her arm as Minho led her to a small, private family waiting room where Jong-soo was now standing alone. The room was quiet. Jong-soo had dismissed his other men. He turned to face her as she entered, and Adira was struck by the intensity in his eyes. Up close, he was handsome, but in a sharp, dangerous way. He looked at her, really looked at her, and his gaze dropped to the bruise on her cheek. His expression, which was usually so hard and unreadable, seemed to soften at the edges. He took a small step closer, and Adira instinctively took a small step back, her eyes wide. Seeing her fear, Jong-soo stopped. He didn't want to frighten her. He slowly raised his hand, not to touch her, but to gently gesture toward her cheek. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice much softer now, almost a whisper. It was a voice full of a concern that surprised even him. Adira was so shocked by the question and the gentle way he asked it that she answered honestly. It was an accident," she stammered. "I fell off my bike. A car came too close and I lost my balance." She lifted her bandaged arm slightly as proof. The relief that washed over Jong-soo was so powerful it almost made him dizzy. An accident. A simple, stupid bike accident. She wasn't mixed up in the dark parts of his world. She was just an innocent person who had gotten hurt. The tightness in his chest loosened. He looked at this brave, beautiful stranger who had smiled through her pain, and for the first time in a very, very long time, Jong-soo felt something other than the heavy weight of his responsibilities. He felt a spark of light, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he would not let that light go out. The days that followed the hospital encounter were a strange and unfamiliar tide in Jong-soo's life, a life that had been governed by strict schedules, unyielding rules, and the constant, low hum of danger. He found his thoughts, usually occupied with business territories and the loyalties of his men, drifting incessantly to the woman with the bruised cheek and the gentle voice. It was an obsession he couldn't rationalize, a pull he felt powerless to resist. 2 days after their meeting, he sent Minho not to deliver a threat, but to deliver a phone, a simple, sleek device with only one number programmed into it. The note that came with it was written in his own precise handwriting, "For if you need anything, anything at all." Adira stared at the phone for a long time, nestled in its expensive packaging. It felt like an object from another planet, a tangible piece of the intense, enigmatic man who had interrogated her with such startling softness. A part of her, the sensible, self-preserving part, told her to leave it in the box, to forget about the world of suits and silent, powerful men. But the memory of his eyes, the way the hardness in them had melted away when she explained her accident, intrigued her. He was a puzzle, and Adira, an artist, was drawn to complex shapes and hidden colors. After a day of internal debate, she sent a simple text. "Thank you. My arm is stiff, hard to hold a brush." The reply was almost instantaneous. "I will be there in 1 hour." And he was. He arrived not with a fleet of black cars but alone, driving a modest, dark sedan. He stood on the doorstep of her small, vibrant apartment, a place filled with half-finished canvases, pots of brushes, and the faint, pleasant smell of turpentine and oil paint. He looked out of place, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the splatters of color on the floor-protecting drop-cloths. In his hands, he held a large paper bag from an expensive Korean restaurant downtown. "I brought food," he said, his voice still carrying that formal, careful tone. "You should not have to cook with one hand." That first visit was quiet, a little awkward, filled with long silences that were neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but simply full. He watched her struggle to open a container of soup with her bandaged hand, and without a word, took it from her, opened it, and placed it back in front of her with a spoon. It was a small, simple act, but in Jong-su's world, actions were everything. And this one screamed of a care he didn't know how to voice. Adira, in turn, asked him about the food, about the flavors, pulling him into a conversation about something other than power and fear. He began to visit every other day. He always brought food, enough for several meals, and he would stay for an hour, sometimes 2. He learned that her arm, her painting arm, was the real problem. She couldn't work on the large commission that was her rent money, a sprawling landscape for a new hotel lobby. One afternoon, he found her staring in frustration at a massive, blank canvas, her good hand clenched at her side. "Describe it to me," he said, surprising both her and himself. She looked at him, skeptical. "What?" "The painting. Tell me what you see in your head, the colors, the shapes." So she did. She described a forest at dawn, with mist clinging to the bases of pine trees and the sun breaking through the leaves in shafts of gold and pale yellow. She spoke of the deep greens and the cool blues of the shadows. As she spoke, her voice grew animated, her hands moving to sketch the shapes in the air. Jong-su listened, truly listened. He then picked up a piece of charcoal from her desk. "Show me where," he said, his voice low. Hesitantly, Adira guided him. "A light line, just here, for the horizon." He followed her instruction, his large, capable hand, which was more accustomed to holding a weapon or signing a document, making a shaky, uncertain mark on the pristine canvas. "Good," she encouraged, a real smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "Now darker here, for the first line of trees." And so, they began. Jong-su became her hands. He would mix paints under her precise direction, his suits often getting tiny flecks of color on the cuffs, a secret he rather enjoyed. He would block in the large, simple shapes of the background while she directed him from her chair. It was an intimacy far deeper than either of them had anticipated, a meeting of his world of action and her world of creation. During a break, she pointed to a small, framed painting on her wall, a simple study of light through a window pane, casting a rainbow on a wooden floor. "I love how the light changes ordinary things," she said softly. "It finds the hidden colors in everything." Jong-su looked from the painting to her face, and in that moment, he felt as if she had just described him. He, who felt his life was only varying shades of black and gray, felt she was finding colors in him he never knew existed. He was learning that his strength could be used not just for protection and enforcement, but for building, for helping something beautiful come to life. The evenings were when the walls truly came down. The conversations stretched longer, moving from her art to his past. He told her in fragments about his father, about the weight of the family business, about the constant need to be strong, to be a leader, to never show weakness. He spoke of his loneliness, a confession so quiet it was almost swallowed by the night. She, in turn, shared her dreams of having her own gallery, of the loneliness of being an artist spending long hours in a silent studio, of wanting a connection that was real and lasting. One such evening, as a soft rain began to tap against her windows, they found themselves standing very close in her dimly lit kitchen. The air between them was warm and charged with all the unspoken words of the past weeks. He reached out, and his fingers, so careful and deliberate, gently traced the faint, fading yellow remnant of the bruise on her cheek, a ghost of their first meeting. "This is almost gone," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart ache. "It is," she breathed. His hand moved to cradle her jaw, his thumb stroking her skin with a reverence that left her trembling. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she rose to meet him. Their first kiss was not a collision, but a discovery. It was soft and searching, a silent promise spoken without words. It started gently, a tender exploration, but as her hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath the fine fabric of his shirt, it deepened. The careful control he always wore like armor began to dissolve, replaced by a raw, hungry need that surprised them both. The kisses grew longer, more intense, filled with weeks of pent-up longing and unspoken affection. They spoke of a deep, mature desire, a craving not just for physical closeness, but for a complete merging of souls. He didn't leave that night. They stayed wrapped in each other on her small sofa, the city lights blurred by the rain on the glass. There, in the quiet dark, they shared more soft kisses and whispered secrets, their bodies curled together, finding a safety and a home in each other's arms that neither had ever known was possible. It was a warm, spicy intimacy that had been built slowly, brick by brick, through shared food, shared art, and shared loneliness, finally igniting into a quiet, burning flame. The peace that had settled over Jong-soo and Adira was a fragile, precious thing, like the first layer of watercolor on a blank page, beautiful but vulnerable to the slightest disturbance. For weeks their world had been contained within the warm, colorful walls of her apartment, a sanctuary built from shared laughter, the smell of paint, and the quiet understanding that passed between them in a simple glance. Jong-soo had started to believe, for the first time in his life, that he could have a world separate from the one of shadows and violence he commanded. He began to make plans, real plans, to step back from the more dangerous aspects of his business, to build something legitimate and clean. A future worthy of the goodness Adira represented, but the past is a patient hunter. A man named Seung-ho, a former ally whom Jong-soo had exiled for reckless brutality and disloyalty years before, had been watching from the shadows. He saw Jong-soo's frequent, unguarded trips to a simple artist's apartment. He saw the way the formidable boss's posture softened when he was near her, and he recognized it for what it was, a profound weakness. To a man like Seung-ho, love was not a strength. It was a lever, the perfect tool to use to break his enemy and seize the power he craved. His jealousy festered into a cold, calculated plan. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Adira was walking home from the art supply store, a new bundle of brushes tucked under her arm, a small, content smile on her face as she thought about the project she and Jong-soo would work on that evening. She was 2 blocks from her apartment when a black van with tinted windows pulled up to the curb beside her, its door sliding open with a harsh, metallic sound. 2 large men she had never seen before jumped out and moved toward her with purposeful speed. Her heart leaped into her throat, a cold dread washing over her. But Jong-soo, changed by love, was no longer the careless boss of old. His first and most important command, issued to Min-ho the moment he realized Adira was his heart, was that she was to be protected, always, even from a distance she would never notice. 2 of his most trusted men, disguised as a construction worker and a bike courier, had been her silent shadows. As Seung-ho's men moved to grab Adira, Jong-soo's men were already moving. What was meant to be a swift kidnapping turned into a short, brutal confrontation on the sunny sidewalk. The sound of scuffling and a sharp cry from Adira was all it took for one of the guards to make the call. Jong-soo was in a meeting discussing the financials of a new, legitimate import-export company he was founding when his private phone vibrated. It was the specific ringtone he had assigned only to the team guarding Adira. His entire body went cold. He answered, and the voice on the other end was tight with urgency, explaining the situation, assuring him Adira was physically unharmed but shaken. The man on the other end of the phone heard a sound he had never heard from his boss before, a sharp, ragged intake of breath that was pure, unadulterated fear. The calm, controlled businessman vanished. The ancient protective fury of the Mafia boss resurfaced, but this time it was honed to a razor's edge by a love so deep it was terrifying. He stood, his chair scraping back violently, his face a mask of stormy rage. "Bring her to me!" he roared into the phone, the order echoing in the sudden silence of the boardroom. It was the same command he had given in the hospital, but this time it was not a curious order. It was a desperate, primal scream from the depths of his soul. He needed to see her, to touch her, to have her safe within the circle of his arms where he could shield her from the entire world. He did not wait for her to be brought to his office. He ran. He ran out of the building, his drivers scrambling to keep up, and he sped across the city to the safe house where Minho had taken her. When he burst through the door, his eyes wild, he found her sitting on a leather sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale, but her jaw set with a defiant strength that made his heart clench. The moment she saw him, the brave facade crumbled, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and fell to his knees before her, his hands coming up to frame her face, his thumbs wiping away the tear. "Adira," he breathed, his voice cracking. He was shaking, the aftershock of his fear rippling through his powerful frame. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly against his chest that she could feel the frantic, galloping beat of his heart. "I am so sorry. My world, my darkness, it touched you. It will never, ever happen again. I swear it to you." In that moment, holding her, feeling the solid, real weight of her in his arms, the last vestiges of his old life fell away. The choice was no longer a consideration, it was a necessity. He would tear down the dangerous parts of his empire brick by brick if it meant she would always be safe. He would become the man she saw when she looked at him, the man who could build a future with colors and light, not shadows and fear. That night, under a canopy of 1,000,000 stars on the balcony of his penthouse, a place that had always felt like a gilded cage, but now felt like a new beginning, he took both of her hands in his. He looked into her eyes, his own gaze clear and certain, stripped bare of all its former hardness. "My life was a monochrome painting," he began, his voice steady and soft. "It was all black and white and gray, a picture of duty and survival. I didn't know there could be color. Then I saw you in that hospital, a splash of gold and warmth in a cold, bright room. You showed me how to see the light. You are my light, Adira. You are every color I never knew existed." He took a deep breath, his grip on her hands tightening. "My forever started the moment I saw you. Please, stay with me. Build this life with me. Let me spend the rest of my days making sure you never have another reason to cry." Adira looked at this powerful, complicated man who had kneeled before her in fear and now stood before her with more courage than he had ever needed in his old life, offering her his entire transformed future. Her heart swelled with a love so profound it felt like it could eclipse the sun. She saw not the Mafia boss, but the man who had painstakingly mixed paints for her, who had listened to her dreams, who had chosen a path of peace for her sake. She reached up and placed her hand on his cheek, her touch as gentle as it had been the first time she guided his hand on the canvas. "My forever began with you too, Jong-soo," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Your world tried to break us, but it only showed us that what we have is stronger than any fear. Yes, my answer is yes. I will stay with you, always." As they kissed under the starlight, a promise sealed, they knew their story was not just one of survival, but of rebirth. They had faced the fire of his past and emerged not scarred, but forged into something new and unbreakable together. Their love was a masterpiece they would spend the rest of their lives creating, a forever painted in the brilliant, enduring colors of devotion, protection, and a peace they had built with their own 2 hands. If you were moved by Adira and Jong-soo's journey from a scary emergency room to a forever under the stars, if you felt your heart ache and then soar as they fought for their love, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you full, immersive romance stories just like this one. Stories about unique couples overcoming all odds to find their happy ending. Subscribe now and tap the bell icon so you never miss a single chapter of